So normally afternoon sessions, it'll be nice to have questions. Otherwise, of course, we can speak something and then maybe we can have the questions. All right. One of the things that the mother would want from us is what is called as self-forgetfulness. This is one of the biggest reason for miseries in life, that we are too much concentrated upon our own self, including when we turn to the divine. We want the divine for ourselves. We are too much about what I am getting out of my contact with the divine. And paradoxically, when we want, we shut ourselves into a small, limited, narrow consciousness and stop receiving. So very often people ask how to open, how to receive. So one of the ways is this, to come out of this sense of self-importance, excessive self-importance, often exaggerated self-importance in which we live. And when we look at the vastness of creation and everything that is around, then we realize that what a foolishness it is. And there are so many simple ways to come out of it. One of the things that one learns at the ashram, and there are so many letters of the mother, when people would write to her that, oh, I am having this problem, that problem, I am miserable. And she would give a simple remedy that try to learn to forget yourself, and the simplest means that is available is through work. It's such a simple way to just come out of oneself, one's boundaries. To do a work, do it well with full concentration on the work, on trying to do it well. This was one of the things that one learns immediately in the ashram context. There were people having serious problems, even psychological difficulties, physical problems, and mother would ask, is the person coming for work? Yes, mother, regularly. Okay, then it's fine, don't worry about it. The person will come out of it. And I've seen this, that it's amazing. One of the things that strikes me as in the ashram, which is in contrast to the way we are used to understanding work culture, is that here is a place where there are no perks and no payments. And people are regular, punctual, they do their job well. Even when there was this massive cyclone, all the hotels in Pondicherry were closed. But in the dining room, people reached. Sure enough, the only place which was open in Pondicherry on that particular day. And from morning, that day there was no token or anything. Whoever came could reach there, would get something and go. So they just made rice and some lentils, and it was like given from morning 6 or 6:30 onwards, and the cyclone was raging. Well past midnight. I have come that day and I know all the trees had fallen, currents had gone off, and these people came spontaneously, joyously, wearing half a shirt. And if you look at some of these youngsters, it's amazing. Even some of these old people, where do they get this enthusiasm and joy from? Where does the commitment come from? And it comes from the joy of service, joy of belonging to the divine, joy of being able to participate in some way which would help the work. This is something beautiful. And this, I feel, very often when we talk about yoga, sadhana, we straight away think about ourselves. I am doing sadhana, I am doing yoga, what I should do to get what I want to get from the divine. And eventually we get nothing, maybe momentarily something. And then we wonder, oh, what is the use? I've been doing some practice for the last 5 years, 10 years. Kuch hota nahi hai. Because I am doing it, that's why. And I want it, that's why. The day we decide that it's not I who want to get, but to give, spontaneously things will happen, because it just widens us. Amazingly it widens us. And one of the things is to forget oneself through work. It's a very simple means given to us. Or to forget oneself in something which is beautiful, something which is high, something which is, as the mother says, disinterested engagement I remember long back when with a center, I had the great fortune, privilege and grace to work at a center. So I opened prayers and meditation for what should be my attitude and state. I was very enthusiastic, mother's work. So even in mother's work, she says, even in a work which represents to you the most divine, yet there should be disinterestedness. And it shook me. I said, what does it mean? And slowly the meaning begins to unfold. What is this disinterestedness? Nothing you demand or expect, but just to give. And the joy of giving. If tomorrow you are out, you are out. And it's such a beautiful feeling to carry. And such a simple cure for most of the miseries. And she would say, there's a beautiful line of the mother, that self-forgetfulness is the best remedy for many of the problems. See, a lot of anxieties, worries, fears, they all come from shrinking upon oneself. And as we were reading in the morning, why human beings are not able to feel the divine? We are shriveled up, we are dry, we are closed, so small, so narrow. And so much tied up to our sense of self-importance. So this is one part of it. Second thing which she would often stress, particularly when she had her readings on the Dhammapada, and of course it's there in the Gita also, is balance and moderation. So sadhana is not an extreme. It's not like, okay, I'll go without food for 2 days and then fine. That's not sadhana. That's another way to feel that I'm doing something. But a balance and moderation, to eat whatever we want to eat, but eat it within limits. Before the doctor sets the limit for us, we set a limit. Relish it, it's fine. Similarly with sleep. Sri Aurobindo somebody who would sleep less, he would say sleep more. Somebody who was sleeping more, he would say sleep less. And so he said, if you read my letters, it'll be very difficult, because he would give a totally opposite advice depending on which way the balance is going. If somebody was meditating too much, he would say no. You will probably shut yourself in some kind of an illusion of experience. This also happens very often. That people withdraw from life, shut themselves, and they are doing a lot of meditation, and they start getting some experiences, and they confine themselves to that, and they are stuck there. So there is a time for meditation. Particularly, it's good to keep, let's say, instead of one long meditation, it's good to have 3-4 settings at different points of time. Maybe 15-20 minutes, 10 minutes, at the most half an hour. Exceptions apart, some who are meant for meditating a lot. But by and large, for us, on an average, 3-4 times when we can go sit, maybe in the morning, at night, afternoon, and just be there quietly, sitting, open, receptive, just waiting for the divine to come. And that itself in a process of giving ourselves. Instead of wanting something, Mother, take this mind, this is yours. This is the troublemaker. Bring their peace and quietness. Or sometimes simply to connect with the divine by writing, through writing, talking, writing a diary. It is such a simple, wonderful method of getting out of many of the difficulties, at the same time connecting with the divine. Very simple way. So, but there should be a spontaneity in it, a real feeling that it's not a diary you are writing, but a letter to the Mother. So many instances, even now I know, where people write to the Mother, and they'd say, just as it used to happen earlier, that you know what, I wrote the letter, even before I posted it, problems started getting resolved. Because we put in touch with the divine. This is what used to happen earlier also, and the same thing applies now. So just to write it and give it to her. That's it. To give, there was a very beautiful book of Janina Stroka. I think it's Captive of Her Love, if I'm not mistaken. Lovely book. Where she says, after many years, not too many years, she just lived for 9 years in the ashram, or 10 years. And she says, now I know what the yoga is. What is it? If I have a headache, I tell the Mother, Mother, this is yours, take it. So simple. So beautiful. What a way to relate with the divine. So to have that kind of a living contact, not contact with, Narada was saying that day something very beautiful, this consciousness to bring into things, that putting something over Savitri. So many of our actions are so unconscious. Even when we are in front of, very often we say, oh, it's mother's picture. This is not, that's one way to look at it from a purely material science point of view. But the other is, it's a presence which has embodied itself in this form. Her presence has embodied itself in so many forms. In this form, she has put something of herself. So it's not just a picture, it's a presence. And just to live with that, such a wonderful little rule Sri Aurobindo gave, which can really change our life. In the ashram context, when people ask Sri Aurobindo, tell us what should be the rule for yoga, for sadhana. Sri Aurobindo gave a very simple rule, which Naulnida has called the golden rule. There is a beautiful talk of Naulnida, the golden rule. And he says there, live always as if you were under the eyes of the Divine Mother. Do nothing, try to think and feel nothing. That would be unworthy of the divine presence. Such a simple thing. Another thing which I find, because this is another aspect which repeatedly comes in life, that we tend to see ugliness around us. Not just evil, ugliness. And we are overwhelmed with it, and we don't know how to react to it. Sometimes we feel, where is the divine? Look at this person, look at that person, look at this happening, look at that happening. And the mother says, one of the cures for ugliness and evil is not to look at the side which is ugly and evil. And then, after this statement, she says, I know when I say this, many of you will say, if I don't look at it, how am I going to cure it? She says, when you look at it and talk about it, you strengthen it, you make it stronger, more and more. So a very simple thing, when, in interpersonal relationship, it happens that people end up criticizing others. When A meets B, they criticize C. When C meets B, they criticize A. When A and C meet, they criticize B, because this is one of the joys of life. Almost a very sacred joy, as if, if one didn't do it, one is missing something. But instead, if we could see the beautiful side, which is there in everyone. And mother says very beautifully that, my child, I always look towards light, beauty, truth. I do not see this part. This is there, I know it. Every human being has feet of clay plunged into mud and mire. I take it as like, it's not only human beings' creation. So this is to be taken for, granted. Even the seer and the sages have their feet of clay landing there. But there is in everyone something which is beautiful, something which is open, something which is turned to the light. And that part has to be nourished. And as it grows, and that's where she says how it cures, it automatically tends to clear the darkness inside. How do we tackle darkness? By lighting a lamp, as simple as that. We all know it. Not by remaining in darkness and struggling with it. So sometimes in yogic life, in the life of sadhana, whatever we may call it, I'm not particularly fond of using the word sadhana. It gives very, sense of self-importance of being sadhak. But anyways, in the course of inner life, we tend to throw ourselves into a very unnatural struggle with all kinds of difficulties. Oh, from today I am not supposed to do this. From today I am not supposed to do this. All right, that's true, and one has to work upon it. But much more important is to strengthen the light. What I am supposed to do, to aspire, to surrender, to more and more love her, how to grow in faith, how to grow in devotion. Nothing else, just to read something. So this positive side of sadhana, of yoga, should occupy 70 to 80% of our time. And the rest she will take care. Very beautifully she will take care. Everything, even things which appear to us as impossible, she will steer us through that. So looking at things, the beautiful side of things, of people, how she would encourage. There were people who could do nothing except, this famous story, Diwan Bhai telling mother, not Divan Bhai, somebody else telling mother that, these people are useless, they should be out. How she has shown the art and science of divine management, how divine manages the creation. It's also something to reckon with in our modern corporate world. How we should manage aligned with the divine. How divine manages. So the person went and said, mother, this person is useless, that person is useless. The mother asked Divan Bhai to prepare a list of people who are useless so that, So he made a list of 25 people who are useless. So mother would say, but this person is doing this. Like that she kept ticking everybody that no, he is useful. Finally, one person, she says, but he puts stamps on the envelopes. So nicely he puts the stamps. Just a small little thing she has observed. That this person puts the stamps of the on the envelope and does it well. That's enough for her to be part of the creation. Ultimately, in our, collective life, what are we really here for? Not for self-assertion, not for, trying to prove a point or one-upmanship, but simply to help each other grow towards that great goal. All of us are at the same level. This idea that someone is superior, someone is special, someone is, God-chosen one is very dangerous. All of us are, little bit up, down, looking from the sun. Mount Everest and the Atlantic depths are the same. It's only our illusion. At the earth level it looks big and small. And then to be together and carry all together, Sangachati, Sang Badatvam, Sango Manasi Janata. Such a beautiful fire mantra with which, Rig Veda starts. That may we think with one mind, maybe unite our efforts, maybe with one feeling, one aspiration go together. In everywhere she has brought that aspect, every sphere of life, marriage. She says that, normally we have a fire and then the marriage. But how beautifully she says to walk your hand together, to hold your hand together and walk the same path, at the same pace, to the same goal, wedded around the central fire. This is the secret of lasting union. How beautifully in everything. There is nothing that she has rejected. Whenever people would say, they asked the mother, now that the supermind has come, what is it going to reject? We have this idea about sadhana as an ascetic life where we have to leave certain things. So mother said, reject? But what? She said, no, mother, supermind has come, so certain things will be gone. Then she became very quiet. Then she says, well, perhaps the hypocrisy. Because in life there is so much artificiality. So another thing which she would really appreciate is genuineness, sincerity, straightforwardness. Not trying to show one thing and being something else. That's what is being like a child, open to her. Not covering. The Vedas speak about it. That, there are forces which are called as coverers. And what do these coverers do? They cover up all kinds of things, dark things, and they paint a very beautiful picture. There is one particular asura which Sri Aurobindo speaks about this asura in Secret of the Vedas, Vala. He clothes himself even in shining dresses. And the big problem is that when we live a life of deception, we are easily deceived. So very often people go for this guru, that master, here, there and there. So people ask the mother, she said, no, you can't say they are deceiving. People are getting deceived because they are themselves living a life of deception. And then she says, however, genuine people, those who have an awakened soul are never deceived by any kind of show. Because they are like that, open inside the heart. So genuineness, not covering something. How beautifully she has described sincerity, one of the fundamental qualities to be cultivated in spiritual life. And she gave so much importance that she said sincerity opens all doors. It is the key to all doors. More than anything else, just being sincere. And then she said, when people come to me, there are some, if I look into their eyes, I just go deep, deep, deep. It's all open, transparent. And there are some, I see an iron wall, dark smoke. They don't allow to go further. They are one thing inside, very different thing outside. That's not a healthy life. That's what is there. If we have problems, darknesses to be offered to the divine, he will take care. He didn't say that you don't come. If we don't have darknesses, then we are siddhas. We have it, we offer to the divine, she takes care. But if we hide it and put a facade and mask, that is dangerous, because it invites a blow. If she really takes it, either we will lead a life which is full of duplicacy and miserable life, or it will invite a blow. Both ways it's terrible. So just to be before her just as we are. So these are some of the fundamental qualities and attitudes which needs to be cultivated in the practice of integral yoga, and in fact in the practice of any yoga. And there are so many instances of so many other yogas also. Sri Ramakrishna Paramahans, we know how Girish Ghosh, when he went to him, and he used to drink, he used to have all kinds of vices. And he told Sri Ramakrishna, you want me to do this yoga? I can't do all this. Very sincerely he said, don't expect me to do yoga. I am prone to this kind of life. He did not hide anything. So he said, doesn't matter. Still you continue with this yoga. But how? What am I to do? I can't meditate. I can't sit quietly for 2 minutes. And Sri Ramakrishna told him, but who is asking you to do all this? So what do I do? You do one thing. Next time when you drink, you think about me and then you drink. He said, that's all. He said, yes. Okay, very good. That's very simple. I can do it. After 3-4 days he came and said, what have you done? How can I do this? How can I give drinks to you? I don't mind doing something to myself, but how can I do this to you? And then he said, I become so uncomfortable now. He said, but you have committed now to this practice. So, if at all yoga is easy, this is the way, this is the path when it becomes very easy, natural, spontaneous. We just flow towards the divine in every which way, in every circumstance. Then another thing which Mother very much emphasized, 2 things rather, which go together. Cheerfulness and gratitude. And if we look at the root of it, cheerfulness comes from trust in the divine. If we really trust the divine, we will be cheerful. Simply because we know He's there. That's it. There is no cause for any sorrow. But, in fact, Sri Aurobindo said it opens us to grace. When we are complaining and grumbling, all kinds of forces enter into us. There are difficult situations, everybody passes through. But at that point of time, if we can still remain in good cheer, it's one of the beautiful things of life. We have been, talking also about, illness and how to cure different ways. But there is a very simple thing. When roga can become yoga. Roga is illness, it's the result of bhoga. Bhoga means enjoying life foolishly. Nevertheless, if it comes, turn it into a yoga. There are people I have seen remaining in such beautiful disposition even during illnesses. We know how Amrita, when had heart attack. Normally people become so serious. You know what, I had a heart attack, and with so seriousness they will recount as if it's a label, badge, one, medal they are carrying. I had a heart attack. Now I belong to an elite group of humanity because I had a heart attack. Some people I am my psychiatrist. It's not a cause for... So, when people ask me, oh Amrita, what happened to you? Expecting me what to do, I had a heart attack. I don't know why I had a heart attack. I have, given my life to Mother. Why I had a heart attack? Nothing like that. Amrita says, nothing. My sweetheart is giving me some trouble. I mean, one couldn't imagine that at that point of time, Amrita could play with words and simply create such a beautiful, as if it's nothing. He says, my sweetheart is giving me some trouble, not that I have a heart attack and I have this problem. Such a beautiful way everything in life can become a means, and this cheerfulness comes directly from trust in the divine. Such people are always happy. I have seen people with paralytic strokes. I have seen them, and they are so smiling, cheerful in the ashram context. So many I have seen and continue to see, with a smile on their face always. You would feel they are miserable, but they are not miserable. They are pretty happy deep inside. Some of them, one of them particularly I remember telling me, I was very restless, so divine has pinned me down. You be here. Put me on the bed. Instead of saying I am bedridden. Amalda, when somebody told him, I believe you are, handicapped now because you are not able to walk. So he said, no, you are mistaken. I am not handicapped, I am leggy-capped. So, can one imagine somebody on a wheelchair being assisted is saying that I am leggy-capped and asking, I have seen him so many years, he was nursing home. So never for one moment he allowed any cloud of despair come to him. The person, he could not do anything by himself. And he would remember his ice cream. Where is my ice cream? Like that. Like a child. So beautifully, no kind of, show or sham. My first encounter with, for instance, Nirodha, it was amazing. I had heard about him, he has written Savitri, and obviously they are yogis. So I was under the impression, who would be Nirodha, and I saw in theatre, ashram theatre, after a program, somebody said, oh, there is Nirodha. Now I say, are you sure? Because I saw him jumping across the little, barricade instead of going up the stair like a child. He just went across. So spontaneous, so beautiful, and such a sense of humor. They never allowed, people to come and start worshipping them and, making a guru out of them. Even now you will see what is written outside his room. Please do not do pranam here. So he would sit there and meditate. And someone came and started looking at him, must have heard something. So Nirodha asked him, Ki korchis, what are you doing? No, I am just looking. So he said, what? Ami ki Taj Mahal, na Qutub Minar. What are you looking at? Am I Taj Mahal or Qutub Minar that you are looking at me? This kind of sense of humor and this kind of, cheerful disposition is itself the sign of divine presence. There is a very beautiful, writing of the mother. I don't have it right now. It's about the sun of divine laughter which melts away everything. It's at the core of all existences. And she says, just look at that. It's the sun of divine laughter. And the other thing that she emphasized was gratitude. It is the sign of the psychic presence upon earth. Gratitude. Otherwise, there are two kinds of people. One who believe, if I get something, I deserved it. But if I didn't get something, somebody has to be blamed about it. Either you, he, she, God, somebody, like. But if I get it, it's my efforts. But there are other kinds who are always grateful. Grateful when they get things. Grateful when they lose things. Grateful when things come to them. Grateful when things go away from them. It's an attitude of life. There's a famous story of a Muslim emperor's wife, Mumtaz. I think she was Humayun's wife. So she was a mystic in her own right. And she had a lovely china glass mirror, not glass mirror. And it broke. And when it broke, the maid servant was terrified. She goes and says, "Oh Empress, that mirror has broken." And she is waiting, what next? And this Empress says, "Wow, wonderful. Thank God, my vanity is broken. That object which fed my vanity day and night is broken." It's an attitude, gratefulness. When everything is snatched away, one says, you are preparing me for your embrace. And when everything is given back, so many ways you are coming to me. This is gratitude. Just to get up in the morning, Mother says, every morning we should make a prayer of gratitude. Just be grateful that we are alive, that we can breathe, that there is this sunlight, that there is this breeze, that we can still think of the divine, remember the divine. This is just a way of life. So these are the qualities which we see in Mother's symbol, 12 qualities that we have to cultivate. Endurance, equanimity. Sometimes things don't go well. Fine. They don't go well with so many people. I am not singled out. We start thinking, why has God singled me out? It happens to everybody. Something or the other goes wrong. It's not like, God has marked us out. Here, where is this man? I picked him. I must put my little thumb over him to make him feel miserable. No. It's the vastness of creation in which vast, immense forces are moving, before which we are not even like ant. We live with a sense of self-importance. When Guru Nanak was put in the jail, and he asked his disciple asked him, why you have been put into jail, whipped and castigated and put in the jail? You are such a God-loving person. Guru Nanak said, don't ask all these questions now. I want to sleep. Morning we will answer this. So morning he was waiting whole night. The disciple couldn't sleep. Why he has been put into jail? He's a saint. Very often we ask these questions. Why me? I am a devotee. As if being a devotee means perfect immunity. We are carrying a Z security around us. Why? So Guru Nanak told him, okay, did you sleep? No, I couldn't sleep. He said, Guru Nanak said, I have slept well. But anyways, tell me, how many ants got crushed below your back? He said, I don't know, I didn't see. He said, see? So he says, oh, quite a few. He said, see, this is the scale on which forces of nature move. We have no clue, no idea. It's sobering to know immense forces that move creation. And if one of them just plays a sport, it is tsunami, destructive, catastrophic. Eruption of volcanoes. We may be watching this serial Mahadev. And we see, and how one step of Shiva, little bit dance and there is catastrophe upon earth. And we say, oh, why Shiva is dancing? Why is Kali doing this? He should stop. Again, why? Because human beings are very important to themselves. But Kali and Shiva, they don't dance thinking of this. When they dance, they are dancing, rejoicing. We too can dance with them, merge with them. They are not destroying, they are liberating. All that is egoistic gets destroyed. And all that is open to them gets liberated, filled with their presence. This is the, people asked about last year when there was a disaster. Mandakini overflew the banks and Kedarnath. So many people died, buried under the Ganges. Oh, why did these people who had gone to a pilgrimage die? We are so much appalled by death. So much, because we are so much attached to this form and all that is physical, all that is external. We just don't see inside. All our life, at least Hindus keep saying, the best way to die is at the feet of the divine and in the Ganges. But when people actually died in the Ganges, at the feet of the divine, they raised a hue and cry. This is hypocrisy. If either one believes this or believes that, if this is so, then it's wonderful. This is the scale on which these forces move. And it may, that's why sometimes we find divine love very cruel. Mother has spoken of that. Because it's not moves at our little humanity. And yet, the beauty is that in spite of this vastness, she consents to become so close, so intimate, so near to us. This is the divine sacrifice. She reduces her stature to our heights. This is how Sri Aurobindo puts in Savitri. She has lowered her down to our scale. We cannot imagine how much Mother and Sri Aurobindo would have suffered simply becoming human. Just the act of becoming human. To be amidst us, to listen to our stupid stories, and yet respond with a... Amrit Das says, as a child he would go to Sri Aurobindo And 1 hour he will talk to him in Tamil. And Sri Aurobindo at that point of time knew very little Tamil. And this continued for 1 year. And then he said, later on he says, I don't know. I used to speak so much. God knows what nonsense I used to speak. My family problem, this problem, that problem. And he would just listen. People approach for such silly things. And again they would reply. And yet, the beauty is they came down to our level. We have such lovely ways, how people have done sadhana. Naulani Das saying, take away, cut open, and take away all the darkness inside me. Like a butcher. And Sri Aurobindo replies back with a marginal notes. Take away, yes, but why like a butcher? With a surgeon's knife. And how they observed smallest things. Naulani Das writes again, I went today and I got a lemon of a smaller size. And I got a bit irritated that why they are reducing the size of the lemon. And he writes a letter to Sri Aurobindo, pretty long letter on lemon. We take away these movements for granted. Oh, look at them, what they are doing. Why they had to, do this today? Why they didn't give ice cream? Why they had small lemon? Why they had, and we just get irritated and come away. We think it's of no importance. But look at Naulani Das writing a letter on a small lemon and his reaction. And he says, take away these reactions from inside me. I don't want them inside. This is sadhana. Nothing is so small as to escape the eye of the master. Everything can become an offering in the great yagna of sacrifice. This is the great path shown to us by Mother and Sri Aurobindo, who have become so close to us, so intimate, so near. Mother says, I am with you means a lot of things. When you sink, I don't stand aside and watch you, saying you are a sinner. I sink with you. I go down with you. Who will say this? I sink with you, I go down with you, to lift us out of that darkness. All that we need is just a simple yes from our heart. Yes, Mother, do it for me. There is a beautiful vision of Naulani Das with which I'll end and then have questions. If there are questions, I don't know. It's a vision of Naulani Das in 1974. Almost an year after the mother is physically withdrawn. And the mother appears before him. And she says, look at me. Look here, look at me. I am here before you. Just the same. You can approach me the same way. Human and divine. Same way. Forget the world, forget your difficulties, forget what is happening outside. Just look at me, remember me, and give yourself to me by my love. That's all. That's all that is required. And she will take the entire burden and do everything for us. This is yoga. And this is love, which is the crown of everything. And this is sadhana. So, as I said, one could flow with it. Yes, please, yeah. I'm happy that there is a question because I was just thinking, yeah, please.
Any thoughts on raising children well?
Plenty of them. Thoughts on raising children well. Very good. I'm glad, because there are so many aspects of. One of the best ways that the divine prepares us for sadhana is to send children to our house. Because we develop qualities which we otherwise would never develop. Patience, for example. Perseverance. Unconditional love. All these things. When children are around, we have to develop them. So it's a beautiful occasion to develop these qualities which we don't have. They compel us. Another thing which is important is that children are very, very keen observers. They just emulate everything. So the moment children are around, we have to rise up to our best. If we quarrel, fight, if we are busy doing, nonsensical things, they just pick it up. And we can't blame them at all. They just pick it up. So instead of saying, do this, don't do this, we have to change ourselves. To change ourselves, it's a well-known thing, is to change others. And it applies most accurately to children. If we want certain qualities in children, we have to straight away try to practice those qualities in ourselves. If we want them to grow up as honest, upright, noble people in the world, we have to practice wherever within us we see that there are ignoble things, there are dark corners, we have to work upon that. They will automatically pick up. Never to force or compel them to become another copy. It's another tendency in all of us. Because we believe instinctively that we are right. Of course we are always right. But that's not the way. We have to allow them the freedom to grow and expand in their way. They will have their own path. They will have their own experiences. They will have their own ups and downs of life. We cannot avoid it. But what we can do is to equip them with certain attitudes so that when they choose their goal, whatever it be, they are supported by these attitudes. So instead of choosing their goals for them, making their choices for them, no. We equip them. And then to turn every little experience of their life into a means to develop this attitude. There is something which happens, at least it used to happen in India of old, that if a child falls and parents, oh, you have fallen, oh, very bad, and they would slap the earth. It's a very bad practice. Actually it is nobody's fault, neither the child's nor the earth's. But what are we really teaching the child? There's a very nice advertisement comes on television, Indian television. I don't know whether it comes here or not. So it's about the girl child, but it's done very beautifully. It shows a boy who is crying because he has fallen. And the mother says, no, boys don't cry. Then again he goes somewhere. The man says, boys don't cry. Everybody says, boys don't cry. And they show that he's becoming very hard inside. And then when he grows up, then obviously he's become very hard. He doesn't understand what tears are, what pain is, what suffering is. And they are thinking they are doing a good thing. So he hurts his wife or girlfriend or whoever. And then comes the caption, if only he was taught that don't make others cry. But we just make them so hard sometimes. Yes, we have to teach them, but with a balance. Sometimes teaching one quality, it's a quality not to cry. Certainly one cannot deny that it's a great quality. But see how exaggerating one quality at the expense of another can create an imbalance. A very subtle ad. I hats off to the person who designed it, because it touches upon a very, very subtle point. So we have to, every experience of life becomes a catalyst for growth. Now when as a child he falls down and we say it's okay, doesn't matter, be more careful and come. Then when he later on in life suffers a fall for whatever reason, he has learned that lesson as a baby. It's okay. When we teach the child, when we forgive the child, we are not very stern. He also learns it. This is okay. We need not be harsh. People make mistakes. It's okay. How many times the mother has said also, and she would do. She said, never scold a child if he has come and confessed his mistake to you. Never. Never allow fear. She would say, the greatest impurity is fear. So to bring fear in, our relation with the child. Everywhere we bring fear. The worst fear is when a child comes to my clinic and I am, feeling the joy of being near a child. Doctor hai, injection de dega. Suddenly I feel that I am some Yamdut or somebody, Doctor will give injection and I feel I am a Yamraj sitting, God of death. My God. So I keep telling, no, I'll do nothing like that. But by now the child is primed. So doctor is a terrible creature. Of course, he may be right. Most doctors, there are quite a few doctors here, do end up sending the patient faster to heaven than perhaps without the medicine. But that apart, the thing is that in every little thing, similarly when children grow up, say when they are entering adolescent, 13 year, 14 year, they fall in love. It's very natural. And many times, this is not the age to do these things. Give attention to your career. No more mobiles, no more this. If we could teach them what it means to care, what it means to love truly. Now, there's another opportunity. Instead of, just pushing them in one direction. The big problem with children is that there is excessive focus on simply succeeding materially, and, we put them on a fast track of ambition right as a child, and their whole development becomes stunted, dwarfed, doing well, seemingly outwardly. And that's a big, the disease of civilization. Sri Aurobindo in the Arya, there is a beautiful question of the month. And Sri Aurobindo points it out then. It's amazing. The big problem is that we are developing the qualities of the head at the expense of the qualities of the heart. So, human beings become unloving because they have learnt you have to push the other person aside and go ahead. So they become harsh. And naturally, after a long time, when all this they come to path of yoga and all, because it's shriveled up, so difficult to feel, that there is so much beauty, love and joy around. So to develop the qualities of the heart is very important. So through all these ways, through examples, and very loving and gentle guidance, there has to be, when the child is very small, you have to set certain boundaries. It's important. Freedom doesn't mean that, any which way. There are certain boundaries which we have to set. These boundaries will slowly become more and more relaxed. And after 15, 16, you have to go through his own experiences. But these boundaries slowly become more and more relaxed. You give more freedom. Even in ashram context, children go for night out. 15, 16, they go for night out. So they stay for the night. Some 6, 7 children, it's been there. It's part of the, they'll go to lake where there are also snakes. And parents have an anxious time. So, and then they come back. But then they become equipped. So very often people ask in the ashram, how are these children equipped to face the world? So I have to tell them they are much more equipped to face the world. Because they are given these opportunities to experience life. Another thing which I feel, I don't know which age group, of course it must be very young children, but when they are 15, 16, they must at least once travel alone. Particularly I am saying about Indian parents. I think it's very important. They don't let the child travel alone, and they are very protective, and they don't really learn or what it means to really manage themselves. Of course, take care of the coordinates where the child is going, stay in touch, fine, but travel alone. It's a very simple way. In ancient times it was called as Deshatan. Then expose the child to these places, these things which are beautiful, but without any dogma. So often I advise the parents that, you want to come to Pondicherry, bring the children. So, they swing between two attitudes. One is, no, are we forcing them? No. Bring them to see a place. And I have seen children who were not got by parents, and when I told the parents that come there, how do you like the sea? You would love a vacation near the sea, and book them in Park Guest House facing the sea, and they just love it. And then they tell their father, I have had such examples, and they say, he didn't bring me earlier. That's not dogmatizing. Dogmatizing is when you say, no, you must go to the samadhi like this. You must eat dining room food. If you don't eat, you are doing something wrong. No, just let them be in that environment and grow up. Mother would say, let them come even and sleep in the playground. She would give that liberty, and that is what helps them to open. Very unconsciously they imbibe something from the atmosphere. So we must expose them to beautiful side of life. Unfortunately, most of the news channels, many things in the school, they get exposed to a very, very dark side of life because it's sensational and everybody talks about it. Whereas there is nothing like a good news, though some people are starting like that, but they are not interested. So they should be exposed to the beautiful side of life. Another problem which again particularly comes with Indian parents is, we have a rich tradition. And we want children to follow a tradition. Now this is a very tricky thing. While it's good to give certain sanskaras, but children will not exactly follow the same way and the same tradition. We have to give them the essence of things, not just a habit. Not that every morning you have to come and touch the feet of Dharti Mata and touch the feet of parents and touch. And nowadays they have found a shortcut. So they, just touch the knee and do it like this, that. Naturally they found it loses, an institution loses its value when we trivialize it. It's trivializing a great, institution. Instead, so nice if we can modify it. They don't have to touch morning Dharti Mata, but to make them feel that, earth is living. They will probably receive it better that way. So this is not that parents' feet has to be touched, but love and respect has to be taught. How do they learn to love parents? Very simple way. If we love our parents, they will understand it. We don't have to tell them that, look, you must get up and you don't know who we are your parents. As if we are some tyrants. We are translating it like that. But when they see that, well, my parents have love and respect for their parents, they just get it. We don't have to tell anything further. So as they go through different stages, to bring the essence of the sanskara, very important to discuss things with them rationally and not to get irritated. If they ask 100 questions, sometimes questions which may be, very uncomfortable for us. Why do you say Krishna is God? Why do you think Hanuman can fly? Any monkey flies? Not to get irritated. Here's a point. Monkeys don't talk and monkeys don't fly. His question is not invalid. So we have to talk to him and help him to understand that what this monkey business is. What really Hanuman represents. Who is Hanuman? It's not about tail. It's not about the monkey features. So that means we have to educate ourselves about what Ramayana is, when we want to give a tradition, what a particular religion is, what a particular culture is. Then they really grow. So without dogma, in a free environment with lot of space, and yet very gently mold. Sometimes it's good to just give them suggestion and leave them, particularly adolescent. I'll tell you, it's a trick which works very well. I can tell you with authenticity because I have a child who has gone past adolescent. And when I read a book on, teenager, I was very touched. The only thing I remember about that book was the person writes that I thought I knew everything about bringing up a child until I had my own. And it's so true. So sometimes, one of my issue was that, he should get up in time. That was my issue. Now everybody has his kink in the head. That was my kink. Though it worked out very well, that he's a journalist now. So, his timings are very uncertain. He keeps reminding me, see, I was right. And I say, yeah, you were right. You prepared yourself for this. But anyways, so what I would say, instead of getting into discussions or arguments, I would just time to time post these messages. Beta, it's much better, if you sleep a little early and get up a little early. Nothing after that. Now, slowly over a period of time, these messages have gone into him. You know how advertisement works in television? This is exactly that. That you are watching something and we don't even notice that pop-up images are coming and they are unconsciously influencing us. So many things can be passed during, for instance, when the children are half sleepy, when they are, just playing something in their environment, beautiful. You have to catch them off guard. Not when I want to, come and sit and this what happened. No, off guard. When they are, and there are moments when they are receptive. This applies in any human communication. Even in husband and wife. Today is, I think, DJ's marriage anniversary. Wonderful. So that's why probably we are talking a lot about it. So, happy anniversary, by the way. Many happy returns of the day. So, sometimes we need to talk. But we don't need to talk at that very moment and clarify everything. Wait for the fires to cool down. Then we can talk. There is a moment when, children are receptive. And that's a moment when we have to start. Most important two things in the end that mother has emphasized very much. One is that instead of dogmatizing about one particular belief system, including, sometimes we turn Mother and Sri Aurobindo into a belief system for children. May not be for us, but for them. We should just give them this idea that beyond this material universe, this physical universe, there is a much greater reality. There is a beyond, there is a divine presence. Don't give it any name, with which we can come in touch. This is one thing. And second, she says that the certitude of truth's ultimate victory. Through all the trials, tribulations, ups and downs, truth will eventually have victory. Satyameva jayate nandritam. So if we can bring that into the child, it will be wonderful if it goes inside the child. And to appreciate when they are truthful and honest. Much better that they come and tell us that, look, today I bunked class and went for a movie. Than that they bunked class, went for a movie and came and said, I learnt very nice things, teacher taught me. We are very happy with that, but it's very dangerous. So these are just some of the, very brief, it's a very vast subject, but these are just some of the things for bringing up a child. Mother has written so much on it. I would suggest those who seriously want to engage in this, please read Mother's writings on the subject. They are all, to make it more easier, they are all available on www.sriaurobindo.org, .net.in. They are available. If you just search the Mother on Education, it's a wonderful, I can tell you, it's unparalleled literature. And it's a pity that many of us don't read it or get to read it much late. And read it. Forget about whether one is following this path or that path, it doesn't matter. So many smallest issues about girls, boys, those issues, studies, concentration, choice of career. At different stages these questions will come. What career should I choose? How to navigate through, your career choices, what it means to make money, what is the secret of what really success is about, what it means. So all these things, physical education, its importance, in such words which are amazingly simple. So please read for more directly the Mother's works. Yes, please.
Yesterday you talked about divine will.
Yes.
So you mentioned that consequences are sometimes favorable and sometimes not favorable.
Yes.
And if they are not favorable, it is because the consequences are a result of the divine will. And what we need to do is change our attitude in case the consequences are not favorable. But I in particular know that if sometimes things don't work in my favor, I try again. So I'm trying to reconcile between trying again and again.
Very good question, very beautiful. But first let me make few corrections in it. One is that circumstances of life are not the direct expression of divine will. That has been probably taken that, because I said in a certain way that they mean the divine will. No. Physical world as it is today and events and circumstances of life are not directly governed by the divine, otherwise there would be no need for supramental transformation. Certainly there is much in life which very obviously with a simple common sense we can say are not expression of divine will. Rapes and murders, for instance. 12-year-old dying, accidents, alcoholism, drugs. Then we have to, if we really believe that they are not the result of divine will. They are the result of a complex play of forces through which the divine will gets distorted. And at the end we see this result. Now, favorable and unfavorable also is from the ego standpoint. So when we say favorable or unfavorable, we are putting ourselves at the center and seeing. But life is not that. Let's accept reality. Life is not like that. Things won't be many times as we desire it to be. So what do we do next? Next step comes here. Now this attitude on one side to persevere in what one has taken is a wonderful attitude. To learn to persevere, to learn to endure, to learn to get back on life without giving up. It's not in this sense that, I must give up. That, okay, if I am having an illness, it can lead to absurd conclusions that if I am having an illness, His divine wants me to have an illness. No. But at the same time, not to get disturbed, troubled, if things don't go our way. Because it's a tremendous loss of energy. So we can, first to learn to accept. This has been dealt by the mother in a very beautiful way in one place in the agenda, because it's a very nutty question. And for a practitioner of yoga, it's a very difficult question, because then on one side we have to accept things as they are. On the other side, we have to try to change them. Certainly we must try to change them. Otherwise, world will be in a mess. So she says, the power to change things, and this is very, very carefully we need to, leave aside divine will. The power to change things comes when we first learn to accept them. It's very interesting. And it applies at every level. It applies in human relationship, it applies at work, it applies at everything. So first to learn to accept without, getting troubled or agitated. Then when, it generates within us a very, very positive environment within, a positive energy inside and all around us. And then when we try to change, and even there, when we want to change, it should be an expression of love, not an expression of strain and struggle. Where the ego comes in, problems will come. So this is the only thing that we have to understand. Certainly we must, like supposing somebody fails in an exam. Of course he must try again. Why not? The least that will happen is that he will grow inside in strength. So we have to understand that this game of life is being played at two levels. One outer, the second inner. There is a very nice little story which illustrates this. That a man was going up the road and suddenly he saw a big stone blocking the path. And he doesn't know now what to do. How do I go further? And he hears a voice of God, push. So he pushes. Can't push. You see, it's absurdity, obviously. So he sits down, very tired. Again he hears the voice, get up and push. Pushes hard, nothing. Third time the voice, push. He said, this is obviously I'm hallucinating now. Gets down. Then, after a while he gets an idea that maybe there is an alternative route I can take. So he takes the alternative route and goes across. And then he says, God, why did you ask me to push? He says, obviously I knew that you are not going to succeed. But what I wanted you is to develop that kind of endurance, muscular strength, stamina, so that you can really undertake the journey further on. You had done no exercise. This was my way of making you do exercise. Take for instance, football. Two teams are playing. I'm speaking about two levels at which this game is played. One team wins, other loses, or maybe rarely they will draw. But both gain, not just monetarily. Both gain in strength, both gain in the joy of the game, both gain in stamina, health, everything. So in this game of life, on one side there is the external game. Now we should not be so much caught up in the external game that we forget the inner thing. When we are caught up only in the external gain, then we suffer and rejoice. What is called as a life of duality. We today are very happy, very good, but tomorrow we should know that we'll be in the dumps. But when we know that there is another level at which the game is being played, like a parallel universe which runs with us, then even when we are playing this external game to the fullest, we never forget this, and that's our vantage point. For instance, when a person plays a role in a theater, at some point he has to also be fully involved in the role. He can't say that it's a role after all. But at the same time, if he is so involved in the role that he forgets himself, then he will start, suffering and rejoicing. It's nothing. It's a play. In the play, his beloved left and went away. It's not real. It's a play. Imagine somebody say, "Oh my God, it's very bad. My best friend deceived me." Nobody deceived you. It was a play. He knows it. So after that, it's very funny to see hero and villain fighting with each other on screen. But nowadays they do these off-screen shots. and when they are having a cup of tea and, jolly sharing. So this parallel part we should remember. And certainly all that happens in life is not with a capital N, expression of divine will. That is one reason why Sri Aurobindo wants the supramental to be established upon earth. It is not. This world is not an expression of the divine. It should be, because there are many intermediaries. And these intermediaries, both gods and the titans, distort the play. Gods by their own idea of what should be, and the titans by their will to obstruct and usurp, they both distort the play. So that's how events are. Yes, please. Exactly. Exactly. So that's why these two attitudes, which are very difficult to balance, we have to balance. On one side, acceptance in life. That things happen, mother knows best, and then after a period of time, all of us experience it, that this was a very good thing to happen. As I said, that Chinese, that Mughal empress, that good, it has gone. This is a very good attitude. At the same time, there are many situations where we have to work towards changing things. Let's say in the work environment, if one is in a work environment where everybody is lazy and sleepy, you have to do something about it. And it's a real situation. Similarly, if you have lost all the money, you have to, build yourself up. You can't say like it's okay. So there is a parallel side to life where we have to will things to change. Somebody has looted us. So we have to work towards it, It's not good to, be deceived by people and just, they loot your booty and go away. No. But this has to be balanced. And in balance, the first thing is to accept, okay, now, fine, it's a loss. Yes. Take it. Strengthen yourself with it. Then get back to life, not with vehemence, vengeance, hatred, agitation, but with all the strength of a hero. And that's what the Gita is about. Gita is about that. That for a long time Krishna taught Arjuna and the Pandavas to accept. You see, the most unfair thing that could have happened to them in the game of dice. But Krishna never asked them to fight. That moment they could have fought and won, tore away, because they were all raging. He should have said, go fight. He said, no, go through 13 years. And after 13 years, when all this has washed away from their consciousness, then they develop the energy and the strength to be instruments of a divine will in action. So this is where we have to balance, and each one will balance one's own way. So we have to change, we have to accept. First accept, wash away the reactions, and then return back on life with all the strength and vigor. And leave the consequences in any case in the hands of the divine, because whether we win or lose the game of life, we are always ultimately winners, because we have moved one step forward. There's this story in Alice in Wonderland when they run the race and ask, who has won? So that character, I'm forgetting the name, Dojo or what, says, all have run the race, all have come first, all are winners. And it's so true that in the game of life, at the end of the day, it's not where we reached, but how we played the game. So if we have to return back for change, play it well. Play it with a clear heart and wideness, tranquility, play it well. And if you accept, take that also gracefully. That makes us move forward. So essentially the goal is not this, but moving forward, and either which way we can move forward. Okay, yeah. Yes. Yes, Mother has spoken about it, because basically, see, it's like, I give this example. I've written a whole book on this, a lot of study, death, dying and beyond. So, one of the things, it's not about advertisement of a book. It's about, it will genuinely help because, it's been done with lot of, love in that. So, it's like, let's say that a child is going abroad to study. Now imagine a situation where parents keep calling and saying, Beta kab aayega, when are you going to come back? I miss you, mama misses you very much. And now, child will be torn. His journey is forward. Instinctively parents do it. Where the other part is that I am happy, wherever you are, do well. I love you, I send my love to you. Now, if you see out of the two, obviously the second approach is better. That's why it is said, those whom we love, even while they are living, the last act of love, which is like the final act, is to set people free. And yet, and that's where we must add that, and yet continue to love. So same thing applies here, that when they are going, what is death after all? It's an onward journey. We don't cry for them. Honestly, we cry for ourselves. They are actually forgetting. That story in Bhagavad, I'm sure you must have read, many of us must have read that story in Bhagavad. And they are on their onward journey. Another 2-3 days they would even forget. They would be born as babies somewhere else, and if we go and tell them, I am your papa, very confused. I'm fine with this papa. I don't want another papa, mama. I am your wife. My God, this wife, you are my mother's age, don't you? So this is a fact. So it's difficult, I know, but most certainly one thing is true, that we should set them free. And the more we cry, the more we send them distress signals, particularly when they are still hovering in the vital world, when they are in contact with the earth atmosphere, they would receive it. They would receive it as vibrations. It's not only about crying, it's also about the grief in the heart. They will feel connected, drawn, they will feel confused in the journey, not knowing what's happening to us. It's like an aircraft wanting to go but not able to take off. So it's a very painful thing, because to hover in the vital world is very, very painful. And that's why in Indian custom there used to be this thing about Shraddh. On the 13th day or 4th day or 10th day, you clear this vital world for them. We can do it in a beautiful way, simpler way, as the mother has recommended. People who love them or love the person who has gone, sit together and send them thoughts of love. Pray that their journey be smooth. It's a fact that they have gone. They won't come back. That which has gone. Now what do I do now? See, always in life this helps to take, this is real. This is a realistic situation. What do I do now? It's painful, yes. But what is the best thing to do? The best thing is to set them free. So with that thought, with that attitude, and yet let's give them a good departure. And that's an act of love. Difficult, I don't deny. When you are attached, it's bound to be painful. And that's where, even this can become a means of moving forward in life. Or, as I said, sadhana takes place through everything. Through birth, through death. We have to let them go. So definitely, if we cry, or if we are very heavy inside our heart, it's not good for those who have passed to the beyond. It draws them, pulls them, up to a certain time. After a month or 2 months, it really doesn't matter because they have gone. Then it's not good for us and for those who are around us, because we have got stuck into some past. And we have to find any which way to move on, because that's the way the stream of life moves. Any which way. And to each one one's own way. Of course, for the devotee it's much simpler to surrender to the divine and go. Otherwise, to maybe change the place, find a new work, a vocation, a new hobby, new interest, maybe, so many ways.
What is that period?
Usually, for most people, it's, as they say, the 13 days. At most 1 month. Maximum, stretching it 3 months.
That means at that time the soul is not from the grave?
Maximum, yes. Not gone beyond the vital world. But this is very rare, except in certain cases of very violent deaths like suicide or, bomb explosions, when suddenly one is disembodied. That's when, Pishachas form. They are out of the body. I know of people who it's happened like that, and they don't know what to do because they are fully conscious and alive, but except without the body. So they need to find a body and enter into that body. So they try to latch on, and that's why it's very good to do prayers and meditation to, especially in such instances where there are suicidal deaths or violent deaths, to make sure that it's dissolved. But in normal circumstances where one has died in a normal, natural way, usually it's not very long. They go further.
What something I recall that they say that in Jainism they say that it's a kshanik. In one moment that the life, the soul is transformed, like it's taking place somewhere else.
You see, all of these truths in scriptures they are trying to relate to a certain experience. So it's true in a certain sense that there is a sudden change from the material to a vital existence. But if you go into its detail, then it's not like there will be a connectivity between the two. It's, quite obvious. Yeah, they would be. But we shouldn't, let's set them free. So we'll just take 2 quick questions in maybe 5 minutes. Yes, both of, Anilji and Jayanti Bhai.
Mother said she was building a bridge.
Yes, through the vital world. She said that for these people who are, yes.
So how does that affect?
Yes, so she saw this. Part of her work was in the occult world. She has done a lot of work. And while she was in Algeria practicing occultism for full 1 year, she would see that, passes through the vital worlds after death is so painful. And since she was on earth as an embodied avatar, she built a bridge through the vital world so that anybody with a little faith in the divine, doesn't matter this way the divine or that way the divine, one can get into that tunnel and pass safely. My own feeling is that lot of subsequent near-death experiences that people have narrated, where they suddenly speak about, going quickly through a tunnel into the light, they have passed through that passage. But obviously, nobody knows who built that tunnel. It's like we go through a bridge, we don't know who built the bridge. But I'm sure this is part of her work and which is being validated by science, except that people don't know that who did it. So many experiences of near-death experiences are like that. Yes, Jayanti Bhai.
Soul has taken a rebirth. Why we continue doing this?
Yes, for the Pandit's life, because he has to... See, we should take pity on the Pandit also. He has to survive, he has to grow up, make his children grow up, send them to... He also ambitions that they will study one day in some good school. And a poor fellow by default or design has taken to this strange profession which is no more now among the peaks. So, that's how he will earn money, no? So, some Shraddha every year and some puja every second day and some marriage, some this, that. So in the process they earn their livelihood. So anyways, you are doing a good job, but we should know what we are doing it. We are not doing it for, the one who has gone, but we are doing it for, a class of humanity who probably needs to survive. I am not fond of that class of humanity though. Okay, last is last. Okay.
If the soul is taking a rebirth, does the soul already know where he is going?
One has to be very developed to have that kind of knowledge. But it is true that in a certain sense the soul chooses, but not immediately. One has to go to that place. First, these experiences have to be assimilated. After one has assimilated these experiences, so that's why between one class and another there is a holiday. So you assimilate those experiences, then you are ready for the next adventure. Otherwise there will be rebirth indigestion. Sometimes it does happen that a portion gets onto, it's a very complex phenomena, no one rule applies, but very quickly, like a portion can get onto another life form and it can be very disorienting. So it has to assimilate those experiences, go to a resting place. It's beautifully described in Savitri, the World Soul Canto, and then come back for the new adventure. And that's where it does choose in a way. But a very conscious choice is only for developed psychic beings. In most people, the psychic being is not developed. It's not fully formed. It's still just a psychic spark. So, we will close it because otherwise it's too long. If people have questions, we have still tomorrow. And maybe some informal, we'll sit around today and night and talk about it. Thank you.